He turned away without a backward glance, and years later, when he thought he'd achieved everything, fate brought him face to face with the love he'd left behind. Yet, nothing prepared him for the truth that would soon come to light. Daniel needed to prove he'd changed, to win back the woman he'd hurt, and to restore her trust. Could love truly overcome time and past mistakes? Find out now in this moving story of second chances. Enjoy, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from so we know how far this narrative reaches. The cloudy sky that afternoon perfectly mirrored Daniel's state of mind. A millionaire, accustomed to the luxury and solitude of his ventures, he watched the city from the dark window of his armored car. Suddenly, something on the bustling sidewalk made his heart stop. Among hurried, indifferent faces, he saw her, Livia. The impact was so intense, it felt as if time had rewound. There she was, the woman he'd loved with all the intensity of youth. The one he'd lost due to impulsive decisions and unbridled ambitions. His driver noticed his fixed, worried gaze, asking if everything was all right. But Daniel didn't answer, merely raised a hand in an almost unconscious gesture. His body seemed paralyzed, and his heart pounded as if it wanted to leap from his chest. Livia didn't see him. She walked slowly, holding a small umbrella and a bag of books. Her hair, now a bit shorter, swayed gently in the wind. Her face remained beautiful, but there was something different in her eyes, something he couldn't quite decipher from a distance. On an impulse, Daniel opened the car door and stepped out. The city noise seemed to fade as he hesitantly called her name. She paused for an instant, not turning around. Then, slowly, she looked at him. Her eyes widened in surprise, and a dense silence formed between them. She softly pronounced his name. Daniel! There she was, for real, not a dream or a distant memory. She was tangible. He approached, unsure how to proceed, and confirmed it was him. She blinked a few times, as if trying to process that unexpected encounter. Years had passed, time had transformed them. But would love still be there, hidden among the wounds of the past? Daniel didn't know the answer, but in that moment, looking at her, he knew he had to find out. Daniel's heart hammered as if it were about to burst from his chest. He'd spent years building an empire surrounded by luxury and triumphs, but in that instant, it all seemed insignificant. The past was standing right in front of him, wide-eyed, clutching a bag of books and an umbrella about to close. Livia took a deep breath before speaking. She expressed that she hadn't expected to see him there. Daniel admitted the same, letting out a nervous laugh, and complimented her, saying she looked incredible. She offered a faint smile, but there was a weight in her gaze, something that made him realize not all the years in the world could erase the scars he'd left. The silence between them became almost unbearable. Daniel felt an urgent need to say something, anything, before she simply vanished again. He asked if she had a minute and if they could talk. Livia tightened her grip on her bag strap, hesitant. He could see the conflict in her eyes. Then finally she sighed and nodded. Daniel suggested a nearby coffee shop and accompanied her, feeling incredibly vulnerable. He, a man accustomed to meetings with tycoons and million-dollar decisions, now trembled walking beside the woman who had once been his whole world. The coffee shop was small and cozy, smelling of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls. They sat at a corner table, away from the hustle. He asked how she was, trying to break the invisible barrier between them. Livia fidgeted with a silver ring on her finger, a gesture he remembered well. She replied that she was doing well, that she worked as a literature teacher, living nearby. He smiled in surprise, mentioning that she'd always loved books, and he remembered her saying she wanted to teach. She nodded, took a sip of her coffee, and asked if he was still in the business world. Daniel gave a short laugh and affirmed he was, but that lately he'd been wondering if it was all really worth it. Livia met his gaze, questioning if it was. He couldn't answer immediately. He had money, power, a luxurious life, but what about happiness? He hesitated, then shook his head, thinking he'd lost things far more valuable. She looked away, staring into her coffee cup as if searching for answers there. Then she asked Daniel why he'd left the way he did. Her voice was soft, but heavy with old pain. He held his breath, knowing that question was coming. He explained he was too young and ambitious, that he thought he needed to conquer the world before thinking about love. And in the end, he lost her. Livia bit her lower lip, as if trying to control her emotions. She said he left her waiting with no answers, no explanations, and that she loved him, but he simply disappeared. The pain in her voice crushed him. He wanted to go back in time, do everything differently, but he couldn't. He apologized to Livia, admitting he'd been an idiot. She stared at him for a long moment and then sighed, saying the past couldn't be changed. He felt a pang in his chest and asked about the future. She smiled faintly but didn't answer, just looked at her watch and stood up. She had to go. He stood up too, fearing that if he let her leave now, he'd never see her again. He asked if they could see each other again. Livia hesitated, then with a small, enigmatic smile, replied maybe, and left. Daniel stood there, watching her disappear through the door. His heart still racing. Perhaps that one word was all he needed for hope. Daniel remained seated in the coffee shop for long minutes after Livia left. He twirled the coffee cup in his hands, feeling the adrenaline of the encounter still coursing through his body. He never imagined that the reunion would shake him so profoundly, or that the flame he believed extinguished still burned within him. However, there was something about Livia he couldn't quite decipher. A secret, a shadow in her eyes that wasn't there before. She seemed reserved, as if holding something back, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. And Daniel knew there was only one way to find out. He needed to prove he wasn't the same man who had hurt her years ago. In the following days, he tried to reach out. He sent a simple message, saying it was good to see her and he'd like to talk more, asking her to let him know when she had time. Livia read it but didn't reply. He waited a day, two, a week. And then, just when he was convinced she wanted nothing to do with him, he finally received a reply. Saturday, 4 p.m. at the bookstore on Augusta Street. It wasn't much, but for Daniel, it was everything. On Saturday, he arrived early. He walked through the bookstore trying to appear calm, but the truth was his anxiety grew with each passing minute. When Livia finally appeared, he held his breath. She wore a simple light blue dress, but it made her look even more radiant. She commented, amused, that he had arrived early. He replied that he didn't want to risk missing that chance, smiling. They wandered through the book-filled aisles, talking about old times, Livia's literary passions, and how life had taken them down such different paths. But even as the conversation flowed, Daniel sensed she was still holding something back, as if an invisible barrier stood between them. Suddenly, he asked if there was something she hadn't told him. Livia stopped, surprised, questioning what he meant. Daniel explained that he saw in her eyes that she wasn't just the woman who taught literature and loved coffee, but that she was keeping something hidden. She lowered her gaze, biting her lip. Livia said that some things couldn't be said right away, that some truths needed time. Daniel asked what she was talking about. Livia took a deep breath, as if battling with herself. She explained that she needed to be sure he had truly changed, that he was ready for something real, something that went beyond what they had in the past. Daniel felt a pang in his chest and affirmed that he was ready. She smiled tenderly, but her eyes conveyed something else, saying, "No, Daniel, not yet." And once again, she left him alone with a million questions swirling in his head. But now, more than ever, he was determined. He would prove he was a different man, and when Livia was ready, when she trusted him enough to reveal her secret, he would be there waiting. Daniel had never been a patient man. He built his fortune by making quick decisions, betting big, and facing challenges head-on without hesitation. Yet now, in front of Livia, he realized that haste wouldn't help him. She was different from any negotiation, different from any challenge he had ever faced. And, for the first time, he was willing to wait. 2 weeks after their bookstore encounter, Daniel finally persuaded Livia to go out to dinner. He chose a discreet, candlelit restaurant with a romantic ambience that clearly stated his intentions. Livia teased as she sat down, saying he always liked to impress. He responded, looking at her intensely, that he did, but only when the person was worth it. The evening began light. They laughed, reminisced about past moments, and exchanged glances laden with a tension that only grew. But mid-conversation something shifted. Livia subtly checked her phone, and suddenly, her expression clouded over. Daniel, noticing the change, asked if everything was all right. She hesitated and said she had to go. He blinked in surprise, asking why now, since they hadn't even gotten to dessert. Livia looked at him as if she wanted to say something, but thought better of it at the last second. She apologized to Daniel, saying it had truly been a wonderful evening, but she needed to leave. She grabbed her bag, gave him a quick kiss on the cheek, and left before he could react. Daniel sat there, motionless, staring at the empty chair in front of him. What was she hiding? This pattern repeated itself in the following weeks. He suggested a walk in the park. She excitedly replied she'd love to, but on the day of the planned outing, she'd send a message apologizing, saying she needed to sort something out, and asking if they could reschedule. A weekend in the mountains sounded amazing to Daniel, but she thought another time would be better. Every time they were together, it was as if nothing else existed. The yearning, the meaningful glances, the undeniable chemistry. Everything signaled she wanted him just as much. But then, as if something pulled her back, Livia would vanish. And it was driving Daniel crazy. He tried not to give in, tried to be patient, but each time he saw her leave, he felt an emptiness that only grew. One unexpected night, Daniel got a text from her. "I'm at the park near your place, meet me if you want." He rushed out and found her sitting on a bench, hugging herself against the cold wind. When he approached, she smiled, but there was a touch of melancholy in her eyes. He asked what she was doing there alone. She replied she needed to think. He sat beside her, his face close to hers, and asked what was on her mind. Livia turned to him and, for a moment, the world seemed to stop. She said it was the way he looked at her, as if she were the only person in the world. Daniel's heart pounded. He affirmed that, for him, she was the only one. Livia's gaze drifted to his lips. He slowly leaned closer, feeling her breath mingle with his. Then, just as their lips were about to touch, her phone rang. Livia pulled away with a start, quickly grabbed the device, read the message and stood up. She said she had to go. Daniel held her wrist, not with force but firmly. He asked Livia what was going on. She stared at him as if fighting an inner battle. If you're enjoying our journey, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you won't miss out on more stories narrated right here on our channel. I want to tell you, Daniel, but I can't yet. He saw the truth in her eyes, and though everything inside him screamed for answers, he let go of her hand. Daniel said he would wait. Livia smiled, a sad yet sweet smile, and thanked him. And once again, she disappeared into the night, leaving Daniel alone with his longing and a mystery that seemed to grow with each passing day. But now he knew one thing. Livia wanted to tell him, but something or someone was holding her back, and he wouldn't rest until he found out what it was. Then something unexpected happened. Traffic was crawling that afternoon. Daniel was in the back seat of his car, impatient, his thoughts drifting between meetings, contracts, and of course Livia. She just wouldn't leave his mind. The mystery, the excuses, the comings and goings. He needed to understand, he needed to know what she was hiding. That's when he saw her at the crosswalk, right in front of the school across the avenue. Livia was standing there, holding the hand of a boy around 7 years old. The boy had messy brown hair and expressive eyes. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He watched as she bent down, adjusting the boy's backpack with a caring gesture, and then gently kissed his forehead, just like a mother would. The shock hit him like a punch, an electric current shooting through Daniel's body, his chest tightening in a way he'd never felt before. The boy, 7 years old, the same age that aligned with the time he and Livia had split up. The air grew heavy. A million thoughts exploded in his mind. Could it be? Could that boy be his son? The driver asked if he was all right, noticing Daniel's fixed, frozen stare. Daniel didn't answer, his eyes unable to tear away from the scene in front of him. Livia smiled at the boy, and hand in hand, they began to cross the street. He didn't think, didn't rationalize. Daniel ordered the driver to stop the car immediately. The driver slammed on the brakes, and before he could protest, Daniel was already out of the vehicle. He called Livia's name. She whirled around abruptly, and when her eyes met his, something flashed there. Surprise, fear, and maybe something more. The boy also looked at Daniel, curious. Daniel's chest heaved, as if he'd just run a marathon. Every step he took toward them felt like it weighed a ton. Livia held the boy's hand tight, her body tense. She asked Daniel what he was doing there. He stopped in front of her, feeling the adrenaline pulse, and retorted that he should be asking her that. His gaze went to the boy, who watched them in silence. He asked who the boy was. Livia took a deep breath and told Daniel that now wasn't the time. He insisted it was the time, his voice coming out stronger than he intended. He closed his eyes for a second, trying to contain the avalanche of emotions. When he looked at her again, his voice was hoarse, laden with something beyond anger or resentment. It was fear, fear of the answer. He asked if the boy was her son. Time seemed to stand still. Livia squeezed the boy's hand tighter, looking away as if caught in an internal struggle. A chilling realization cut through Daniel. If it were a lie, she would have said so immediately, denied it, laughed, called it absurd. But she said nothing, and that silence was the answer that shattered everything he thought he knew about his life. "My God," Daniel muttered, taking a step back and running a hand over his face. "All this time," Livia pleaded. "Please, not here." He pressed her, asking where then, and when she was going to tell him. If someday, or if he'd only find out because fate decided to mess with him. The pain in his voice made Livia's eyes well up. The boy watched them with a confused look, and she quickly knelt beside him. She told her son to go buy a juice, took some coins from her purse, and handed them to him. The boy hesitated, calling for his mom. Daniel felt the ground vanish beneath him. The boy took the coins and went to the small kiosk on the corner. Only when he was out of earshot did Livia turn back to Daniel. She said, her voice low and filled with guilt, that he was right, that she should have told him. Daniel let out a humorless laugh, asking if it was true. She closed her eyes for an instant, taking a deep breath, and confirmed it was. The air left his lungs, the weight of that word hitting him like a blow to the chest. He asked why she had hidden it from him. Livia ran her hands over her face, as if grappling with something even bigger inside her. She said she had her reasons. He asked what reasons could justify keeping him from his own son. She looked at him, her eyes filled with pain, and said she would tell him everything, but not there. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm the storm raging within him, and asked where, and when, because he wasn't leaving without answers. Livia looked at the boy, who was finishing paying for his juice and heading back toward them, and said it would be the next day, at her place at 8. Daniel watched her for a moment, trying to gauge if he could trust this. Then he looked at the boy, at his son, and knew he had no choice. He would be there because, for the first time in years, his life would never be the same. The next day, Daniel parked his car in front of the unassuming building where Livia lived. The entire drive, his mind had been at war. He was about to hear the truth she'd hidden for 7 years, about to understand why he'd been kept from his own son. He took a deep breath and got out of the car. When he rang the doorbell, the door opened almost immediately. Livia was there, in jeans and a light blouse, barefoot, as if she'd been home for hours, waiting for him. Livia's voice was calm, but it carried a weight Daniel couldn't ignore. He responded in the same tone. She stepped aside for him to enter. The apartment was cozy, full of little details that screamed of a life built with love. On the wall, there were children's drawings taped up, a toy car on the sofa, and a bookshelf full of books in the corner of the living room. This was a home he had never been a part of. Livia said Davi was asleep and that they could talk calmly. Daniel nodded and waited for her to continue. Livia walked to the living room table and pulled out a chair. He did the same. They sat facing each other, and for a moment, all that could be heard was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then she began. Livia explained that when he left, she thought her world had ended. She truly loved him, and suddenly he was just gone. Daniel lowered his eyes, knowing there was no justification for what he'd done. Livia continued, saying she found out she was pregnant a month later. Her voice didn't tremble, but it was heavy with memories. She recounted how her parents freaked out, saying she was too young, that she was ruining her life. Her father wanted her to give the baby up for adoption, and her mother thought it best to end the pregnancy before it was too late. Daniel clenched his hands on the table, feeling his breathing grow heavy. Livia continued, explaining she couldn't go through with that, because the baby was already a part of her. She didn't care if she was young, if it would be hard, if everyone said it was a mistake. She knew she wanted her child. She took a deep breath before going on. She left, moved out of her parents' house, cut contact with everyone. She stayed with a friend for a while until she could get a job and rent a small room. And then Davi was born, and from the first moment she held him, she knew she had done the right thing. Daniel felt the weight of every word. He asked about himself, his voice quieter than he'd intended, why she never told him. Livia looked at him for a moment before replying that it was because he left her, without explanation, without looking back. She said he wanted the world, wanted to be big, and that she knew a child wasn't part of his plans. She was devastated and thought that if she looked for him, all he'd say was that he didn't want that responsibility. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He stated that she didn't give him a chance to choose. She lowered her eyes, and her voice devoid of anger, just deep weariness, asked if he had given her a chance. She said she was alone, that he wasn't there, no one was, just her and Davi, and that she learned to be enough for him. He ran his hands over his face, saying he would have stayed if he'd known. She asked directly if he truly would have stayed. Daniel opened his mouth to reply, but stopped. The truth was, he didn't know. 7 years ago, with his head full of dreams and ambitions, he didn't know if he would have been the man Davi needed. But now, all he wanted was to be there. He admitted he messed up, but he was there now. He told Livia he wanted to get to know his son, wanted to be part of his life. She remained silent for a long time. Livia explained that Davi had never had a father, that for him, it wasn't an empty space. He didn't miss what he'd never had. But Daniel countered that he felt it. Livia closed her eyes for an instant, taking that in. When she opened them again, her expression was softer, but still cautious. She said she wouldn't stop him from meeting Davi, but it had to be on Davi's terms. Daniel nodded, knowing that was the only possible answer, and added that it would be on her terms too. She offered a small smile, the first of the night, and confirmed. For a moment, they just stood there, looking at each other, surrounded by years of unresolved history. Nothing was completely right, nothing was settled. But for the first time there was a beginning. And for Daniel that was everything. Daniel spent the night wide awake. After the conversation with Livia, he returned home, but sleep wouldn't come. Sitting on the balcony of his luxurious apartment, he looked out at the illuminated city and felt an emptiness that had never been so apparent. 7 years without knowing he had a son. It was hard to process, even harder to accept that while he traveled the world, closed deals and accumulated wealth, his own son grew up without even knowing he existed. Now he would have to win him over, and deep down, he knew it wouldn't be easy. The next day, at the agreed-upon time, Daniel was at Livia's doorstep. His heart pounded. He had faced meetings with billionaires, given speeches to hundreds of people, made decisions that changed entire companies, but nothing, absolutely nothing prepared him for that moment. The door opened and Livia was there. She simply said, "Come in." He stepped inside and smelled coffee mixed with something sweet, maybe cake. It was a small, simple but welcoming home. Then he saw Davi. The boy was sitting on the living room rug, building something with Lego bricks. He had messy brown hair, a facial feature Daniel immediately recognized as his own. Livia took a deep breath before speaking. She introduced Daniel as a friend of hers. Davi looked up, analyzing the tall man who had just entered. Daniel, his mouth dry, tried to smile and greeted him. He asked what Davi was building. The boy replied it was a rocket, then picked up a piece and carefully snapped it into place, saying it would be the fastest in the world. Daniel's heart clenched. As a kid, he loved building things. He and Davi were alike, even without ever having met before. Daniel commented on the rocket, saying it needed a solid base, otherwise it wouldn't hold up for launch. Davi looked at him sideways, asking how he knew. Daniel explained he'd made rockets like that when he was little. The boy seemed to consider that, then, without a word, pushed a small pile of pieces closer to Daniel. He then asked for help. Daniel blinked serious. Davi shrugged, saying if he really knew how to do it, he wanted to see. Livia watched the scene with a mixed look of surprise and something Daniel couldn't decipher. He picked up the pieces and started building alongside his son, and for the first time he felt accepted. Time slipped away without Daniel noticing. He and Davi stayed in the living room for almost an hour, testing rocket models and discussing what the best design would be. Livia just watched, not interfering. After a while, she brought a plate of cake and juice for her son. Davi ate absently, excited about his new creation. He casually asked if Daniel would come back another day to help him build the launch tower. Daniel felt his chest warm and said he would if his mom allowed it. The boy looked at Livia. She gave a faint smile and said they could definitely arrange it. It wasn't much, but for Daniel, it was enough for now. As he left the apartment that night, he knew he had only taken a small step, but for the first time, he felt he had a chance to be what he should have been from the start, Davi's father. Gradually, Daniel became a part of Davi's life. At first it was brief encounters, park outings, ice cream trips, afternoons building Lego rockets. But as the weeks progressed, their bond strengthened. Davi no longer treated him like a stranger. Now he'd call him to play ball, wanted to know what kind of work he did, and asked what his favorite cartoons were when he was little. And Daniel realized, with every conversation, every spontaneous laugh, that being with Davi was the most important thing in his life. And being with Livia, well, that was a feeling that never faded. That's why, one day, Daniel extended an invitation. He wanted them to spend a weekend with him. Livia looked up from her coffee and asked if it would be at his place, on the farm. He said it wasn't anything formal, just a chance to relax. She hesitated and he noticed. Livia asked if he was sure. He held her hand across the coffee table where they sat, and affirmed that yes. He wanted them to experience a bit of his world. She sighed thoughtfully, but before she could answer, Davi, who was engrossed in a dinosaur book, interrupted, asking about the farm. Daniel smiled and confirmed, saying it had a lake and horses. The boy's eyes lit up, and he exclaimed about the horses. Daniel said yes, and Davi expressed his desire to go. Livia chuckled, saying he never missed an opportunity. He crossed his arms and said she always told them they needed to experience new things. She shook her head, giving in, and said, "All right, let's go." And Daniel felt that weekend would change everything. The house was massive, surrounded by mountains and seemingly endless trees. Davi was enchanted by the horses, spending much of the day learning to feed them and even riding one with the help of a farmhand. Livia watched from a distance, arms crossed, a soft smile on her lips. Daniel approached her and commented that she was quiet. She replied she was just enjoying the view. He looked at her for a moment, but knew it was more than that. He asked what she was thinking. She turned her face to him, hesitant, and said he realized how different his life and theirs were. Daniel looked at Davi, who was laughing as the horse moved slowly, and asked if that mattered. Livia didn't answer immediately. She said she just wanted to be sure that all of this wasn't fleeting. Daniel felt a pang in his chest and told Livia he'd never been so sure about anything in his life. She looked away, but he didn't push. After all, he had something important to do that night. After dinner, while Davi slept, exhausted from the day's excitement, Daniel called Livia for a walk by the lake. The night was clear, lit only by the moon and the water's reflection. They walked in silence for a while until he stopped and took her hand. Daniel asked if she had ever questioned if all of this was real. She nodded, watching him intently. Daniel took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. He said he wanted her, always had, but now he wanted both of them. He wanted to be a father to Davi, and he wanted them to be a real family. Livia opened her mouth to speak, but he continued. He said he knew it might seem fast, but for him it made perfect sense. So, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He said he wanted to marry her. Time seemed to stop. Livia stood still, her eyes fixed on the ring he held. She whispered his name. Daniel. He told her she didn't have to answer now. He just wanted her to know he was serious. She lowered her gaze to the ring, then to him. Her heart raced. Part of her wanted to say yes, wanted to let herself be swept away by that moment, by the idea of finally having everything she'd once dreamed of. But was it real, or just the circumstances? Did he want to marry her because he loved her, or because he wanted to be part of Davi's life? And more than that, would he be ready to be a husband, a father, to share a life with her after so long apart? Livia felt her chest tighten, torn between happiness and fear. Then she took a deep breath and replied that she didn't know Daniel. He didn't hide his disappointment, but simply held her hand more firmly. He said it was okay, that he would wait. And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized that some things can't be won quickly. They have to be earned. The next day the morning was perfect. The sun shone without excess, and the light wind swept across the farm fields, making the day pleasant. Davi ran back and forth, excited about the idea of finally riding on his own. Daniel watched from a distance, smiling. Seeing his son so happy, so free, made it all worthwhile. Davi proudly shouted that he thought he was good at it now. Daniel teased, saying he was amazing, but something was missing. Davi looked at him curiously, asking what was missing. Daniel adjusted the hat he had borrowed from one of the farmhands and puffed out his chest, saying a true knight needed a challenge. Livia, who was sitting on the porch of the house, chuckled when she saw his pose and told him not to get any wild ideas. But it was too late. He'd already spurred the horse across the field. Davi cheered, clapping his hands and egging on Uncle Daniel. That alone was enough to make Daniel's heart race, but he barely had time to process it. The next instant, the horse made a sudden move and Daniel lost his balance. Someone yelled, "Look out!" But there was no time to react. He hit the soft earth hard, feeling an impact reverberate through his body. Livia sprinted over, Davi right behind her. One of the farmhands arrived at the same time, and together, they helped him roll over. Livia asked if he was okay, her voice thick with worry. Daniel blinked a few times, dazed, but still tried to keep up his playful demeanor, saying he'd been better. And then everything went dark. The first thing Daniel felt upon waking was the strong smell of a hospital. He slowly opened his eyes, blinking against the fluorescent light of the room. His head throbbed. He tried to move, but his body protested. Finally awake, a soft voice made him turn his head. Livia was there, sitting beside the bed, arms crossed, but with a glimmer of relief in her eyes. He asked what happened. Livia explained that he fell off a horse, blacked out, and gave them quite a scare. She watched him, saying he had a mild concussion, but he was fine and needed to rest. He sighed, saying he just wanted to impress Davi. Livia smiled and told him she knew, but he needed to stop showing off. He laughed, and she joined him, relieved to see him well enough to joke. A brief, comfortable silence settled between them. Then Daniel asked about Davi, if he had stayed at the farm with the staff. He wanted to come, but Livia thought it best to spare him seeing a hospital so soon. She assured Daniel he was fine and that Davi had spent the day asking about him. Daniel smiled, feeling something warm his chest. He never imagined he would one day be so important to someone. Livia continued, saying they would return home in a few hours, as the doctor wanted to observe him a little longer before discharging him. Daniel, with a half-smile, asked what he should prepare for. Livia chuckled and said, "For Davi's interrogation, of course. He's going to want all the deets." Daniel replied he could bet on it. When they arrived, it was late afternoon. Davi was on the porch, waiting eagerly. As soon as he saw the car, he rushed out and hugged Daniel, who barely had time to brace himself. Davi told Daniel he'd scared them. Daniel replied he knew, but he was fine. Davi pulled back just enough to examine him more closely and asked if he was really okay. Daniel smiled and said if he wasn't, did Davi think he'd be there? The boy seemed to ponder this and, satisfied, nodded. Then he declared that Daniel couldn't do anything alone from that moment on. Daniel frowned, asking what he meant. Davi explained that Daniel needed to rest and that he would take care of him. Before Daniel could protest, Davi was already pulling his hand, telling him to hurry because he'd already prepared a blanket on the sofa. Livia watched the scene, arms crossed, shaking her head, and commented that now he had a private nurse. Daniel looked at Davi, who was pulling him with determination, and said he thought he was in good hands. And he truly was, because for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt he truly belonged somewhere, and that place was right beside them. The night was calm on the farm. The gentle breeze made the curtains dance softly, and the silence was broken only by the distant chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves around the house. Davi was already asleep, exhausted after a busy day. In the next room, Daniel and Livia lay together in bed, their bodies close, breaths mingling. He lightly traced a path with his fingers along her arm, feeling her skin tingle. Livia whispered that she had waited so long for this. She smiled against the pillow and said she had too. His gaze enveloped her in a way that made her heart race. There was no longer fear, doubt, or barriers between them, just a love that time couldn't erase. Daniel leaned in and kissed her. At first, it was a soft touch, full of tenderness, but it soon transformed into something more intense, deeper, as if both wanted to reclaim the lost years. Passion came naturally, without haste, but laden with desire. In that moment, there was no past or uncertainty, only the certainty that they belonged to each other. That night, they gave themselves completely, in the most sincere and pure way love can be. The next morning, Daniel woke first. Livia slept beside him, her face serene, her hair spread across the pillow. He smiled, feeling a peace he had never experienced before. Here, beside her, everything made sense, and he knew he no longer wanted to live without it. Livia slowly opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, and murmured, "Good morning." He replied, "Good morning," kissing her forehead. She stretched and turned to face him better, asking if he'd been watching her sleep and what he was thinking about. Daniel took her hand, intertwining their fingers, and said he couldn't imagine his life without her and Davi anymore. She smiled faintly and asked if his proposal was still on the table. He laughed, saying, "Always." Livia watched him for a moment and then took a deep breath, saying she thought her answer was yes. Daniel's heart pounded. He asked if she was serious. She nodded, smiling. Livia said she loved him, always had, and seeing him with Davi, seeing how much he already loved him, she knew this was real, knew it was right. He held her face in his hands, looking at her intensely, and said he would make her happy, her and their son. She closed her eyes for an instant, feeling the power of those words, and said she knew it. And then he kissed her, sealing that promise. After breakfast, they sat on the porch. Davi played with a toy truck on the floor, oblivious to the serious conversation awaiting them. They exchanged a look. "Son," Livia called. Davi looked up. "Hi, Mom." She asked him to come over, they needed to talk. The boy stood up and jumped onto the sofa between them, excited, asking about what. Daniel took a deep breath. He said it was about the three of them. Davi tilted his head, curious. Daniel asked if he liked him. The boy chuckled. "Of course, you're my best friend." Daniel's chest swelled at those words. He looked at Livia, and she nodded, encouraging him to continue. Daniel asked, "And what if I told you I'm more than that?" Davi frowned. "But how?" Livia gently took her son's hand. She asked Davi if he remembered when he asked about his dad. The boy was silent for a moment and then nodded, confirming, "Yeah, you said he wasn't around." She took a deep breath and explained it was because he didn't know Davi existed. Davi looked at Daniel, then back at Livia, asking what that meant. Daniel lightly touched the boy's shoulder and said, "It means I'm your dad, Davi." Silence hung in the air for a few seconds. The boy looked from Daniel to Livia, as if trying to understand. "You're my dad?" Davi asked. "Yes, champ, I am." Davi blinked a few times but then asked, "But does that mean we're going to be a family?" Livia smiled. "Yes, Daniel and I are getting married." The boy's eyes widened. "Seriously?" Daniel nodded, apprehensive, awaiting his reaction. Davi was silent for a few seconds, then broke into a huge smile and jumped into Daniel's lap. "This is awesome." Daniel felt his chest swell with emotion as he hugged his son. He asked if Davi liked the idea. Davi replied, "Of course. I already loved you like a dad now. Now it's for real." Livia smiled, her eyes shining with happiness at seeing the two of them together. Davi pulled back a little and looked at both of them, then asked, "But can I call you mom and dad together now?" Daniel and Livia looked at each other and laughed. "Yes, son, you can," Livia replied. Davi cheered, raising his arms. "Best day ever." Daniel and Livia embraced, and he tenderly kissed her forehead. The family that should have always existed was now complete, and the love that time had tried to extinguish finally bloomed, stronger than ever. The following days were the happiest Daniel had ever lived. Each morning, he woke to Davi jumping on his bed, demanding attention, with Livia laughing in the background, saying he'd created his own little personal alarm clock. Farm life was behind them, and together they returned to the city to finally begin this new phase as a family. And now, with the wedding approaching, everything felt like a dream. Livia had never imagined planning a wedding. In fact, she never thought she'd get this chance with Daniel. But now, here she was, trying on dresses, choosing flowers, while Davi ran between the store's chairs, knocking over fabric samples. "This one's pretty." The boy pointed to a sparkling white dress. "You want me to look like a birthday cake," she joked. Davi laughed. Daniel, who was sitting, observing everything, smiled and said, "I don't think it matters which dress you choose. You'll look beautiful either way." Livia looked at him through the mirror, and for a moment, it was as if they were the only two people there. She told him he knew she wasn't into luxury. He stood up and walked over to her. He walked over to her and said he knew she wasn't into luxury, but this moment was theirs, and he wanted it to be perfect for her. She smiled. The big day finally arrived. The ceremony took place at sunset on a sprawling property, surrounded by trees, flowers, and string lights hung among the branches. The ambience was simple but magical. Davi wore a small suit and carried the rings with the utmost pride. When Livia appeared in the aisle, holding a delicate bouquet, Daniel held his breath. She had never looked so stunning. The gaze they exchanged as she walked towards him carried everything. The years of separation, the pain of distance, but also the sheer joy of finally being where they were always meant to be. When the officiant asked if Daniel accepted Livia as his wife, he didn't hesitate for a second, replying with a resounding, "Yes, forever." And when it was her turn, her eyes sparkled before she, too, answered with a firm, "Yes." Davi grinned from ear to ear as they kissed, and at the end of the ceremony, he dashed over to embrace them. He exclaimed that they were now a real family. Daniel whispered against his son's hair, "We always were, son." The months flew by, and the married routine was everything Daniel had always wanted, even without realizing it. He adored waking up next to Livia, making pancakes on Sundays with Davi, and even the simplest days felt special. But nothing compared to the day Livia gave him the news that would change their lives once again. She was pregnant. Daniel was stunned for a few seconds, then he laughed, then cried, holding Livia as if he'd never let her go. When he told Davi, the boy jumped with joy, exclaiming he was going to be a big brother. Daniel confirmed it. He placed his hand on Livia's belly and asked, full of curiosity, if they had a name yet. Livia looked at Daniel and he smiled, saying, "Renaa." And in that moment, as the three of them embraced on the sofa at home, Daniel knew his life was complete. That love had weathered time, mistakes, and circumstances, and now it was just beginning. And that was the story of a love that time couldn't erase. If you were touched by this journey full of reunions, overcoming challenges, and family, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories, and comment below what you thought of this ending. Plus, there's another video waiting for you on the end screen, so click now and keep living great love stories. If this journey resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to explore more narrated stories on our channel. And remember, share this video with anyone who loves discovering powerful, unexpected stories. Thank you for being here with us on this journey. Your presence and support mean the world, and it's what inspires us to keep sharing these stories. We're grateful to have you as part of our community. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments. Your voice makes all the difference. Let's keep exploring these journeys together. If this journey resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to explore more narrated stories on our channel. And remember, share this video with anyone who loves discovering powerful, unexpected stories.